Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thanks for holding this hearing. It is an extremely important issue to be able to discuss the health of our nonprofit sector and how we can support and encourage their continued work. This is an issue that's very near and dear to me. I served for more than 20 years with nonprofits. I'm very passionate about the work of nonprofits, and this is also a policy issue for our nation as well. Let me first say thank you to those that serve in the nonprofit sector, both that are here and that are all over the country. You do remarkable work and are the real safety net in times of need. I tell people all the time, we really have three safety nets in America. While most folks look at government and say that's the safety net, we really have three different safety nets. The first one's the family. The second one is the community that's dominated by churches, nonprofits, both secular and faith-based nonprofits that are out there. And then the third is government. If the family fails and if the local community and the nonprofits are not able to meet the need, then government is the third option there. So the key aspect is to be able to make sure all three of those safety nets stay healthy and then stay able to be able to do their task. That's what happened during COVID-19, quite frankly. Our charities and our nonprofits rose to the occasion. They serve countless Americans facing uncertainty and difficulty all across the country. But they weren't immune either from the effects of COVID-19 based on their workforce, their operations, their organizational structure itself. According to Johns Hopkins Center for Civil Society Studies' 2020 Nonprofit Employment Report, during the first 3 months of the pandemic, from March through May of 2020, the nonprofit sector lost an estimated 1.6 million jobs, reducing the nonprofit sector by over 13%. As of the end of last year, the sector is still down nearly 500,000 jobs. We know that encouraging more Americans to give will help direct additional resources to nonprofits to ensure they can continue to provide vital services to our communities. In 2020, the CARES Act, we included a provision to allow taxpayers to take a deduction of up to $300 for charitable gifts they make. Then in December of 2020, we extended that provision so that taxpayers could deduct $300 or $600 for joint filers for gifts given in 2021. As a result of that, we had a record amount of giving in 2020 to nonprofits. Unfortunately, this provision expired at the end of last year. This provision is a non-itemizer charitable deduction, acts as both a lifeline to our nonprofit sector who felt the effects of COVID-19, and it also answers the call to service. It's an incentive for people to be able to give. Now, we're again reminded how crucial these organizations are, both in local communities and internationally, as we see the nonprofit community respond to the devastating crisis in Ukraine currently. They're supporting Ukrainian citizens with care, housing, and food, and that's being done by a tremendous number of nonprofits. Having the charitable deduction in place can incentivize even more giving at critical times like these. This provision is something I'm very passionate about and have worked on for several years with a great group of partners through the introduction of the Universal Giving Pandemic Response and Recovery Act last year. I have folks that catch me all the time and say, Americans are very generous. They will give without the tax deduction. So the tax deduction is not necessary to encourage Americans to give. I always smile at them and say, go to any nonprofit in America, pick any one of them, and ask what their highest month of giving is. And they will always smile at you and say, December. That is not because of the Christmas spirit. It is because that's the end of the tax year, and they know if they're going to get the deduction, they have to do it right now, which is also why for many nonprofits in 2020 and 2021, they had a very large number of gifts the last week of December of $300, the exact amount of that tax incentive. I thank nonprofits for their work, and I want to make sure that we continue to be able to encourage their work as the safety net in our society. For all of you that are experts on this panel today, thank you for giving your time and your effort, both in your written testimony and the oral testimony you'll give. I thank you for your steadfast dedication to your work. Mr. Chairman, I also ask that Ranking Member Crapo's opening statement be included in the record.
Absolutely, we will do that, and we're all going to work as we've done on a bipartisan basis on these issues.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned before, and as several of you have mentioned on this, this is something that I think is extremely important that we deal with, is non-itemizer charitable deduction. to incentivize more donations on the lower end and to be able to keep that going. The data, I think, also supports this, and we've talked about it a little bit, but I want to raise a couple of things and some stories here. Compared to 2019, after the $300 deduction was enacted in the CARES Act, gifts of less than $250 grew by 15% in 2020. So contrary to most examples of growth in giving during the times of crisis, typically the growth in these small gifts outpaced the growth in larger contributions by 1.5 times. When compared to 2019, there was a 28% increase in $300 donations on the final day of 2020. That's the exact amount of actually what the donation amount was. So there's obviously some connection there. And I wonder what that would have been if the number would have been higher for that time period as well. According to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, compared 2019 to 2020, the overall number of donors grew by 7% in 2020. New donors increased by 18%, and overall giving increased by over 10%. On top of that, based on their analysis of over $46 billion in charitable giving, the Black Bond Institute estimates that charitable giving in the U.S. grew by 9% in 2021. So, how do we keep this going? And how do we continue to be able to fan the flame of this? I would tell you it is significant, and we've seen it be significant. Let me just give you a few stories from my state in Oklahoma. Amy from Family and Children's Services was writing and said, when the new tax laws were amended during the pandemic, it actually gave me more incentive to dig deeper because I knew that not only would the nonprofit organization get the proceeds they needed, but I also got something in return to help my spending that wasn't available to me prior to this. It was a win-win. Tom, who's the Chief Development Officer at Family and Children's Services in Tulsa, said, I often get asked as a fundraiser for nonprofit, how is annual giving going? And have we seen a decline since we were not able to do in-person events? He said, in fact, we saw a 17% increase in first-time donors and amongst donors 40 years or younger. A few of them said that the tax deduction made them more generous, and they were able to do something even more than what they thought they could before because of that advantage. Melissa, who's the Director of Community Engagement and Remerge in Oklahoma City, said last year we had 10 gifts of $300. 3 of those donors were new donors who stated that the tax credit had impacted their decision in the size of their gift. Angie, who is the Chief Development and Marketing Officer at Sunbeam Family Services, a great group, said when universal tax deduction was enacted, Sunbeam experienced an increase both in total donations and the average donation amount. So we've seen not only just those stories, but a lot of other evidence. I have worked to be able to expand this. And I think we can further support our nonprofits. Several colleagues and I have joined together to expand this. Under our bill, taxpayers would be able to do a charitable deduction of a third of the standard deduction, just over $4,000 for single filers and $8,000 for joint filers. This bill ensures that every American gives, not just those with high incomes and those that itemize on their tax returns, others are able to give and to be able to give at larger amounts, and they're incentivized to do that. I do want to thank my fellow sponsors, Senator Coons, Lee, Shaheen, Tim Scott, Klobuchar, Collins, Cortez Masto, as well as other members of this committee that have co-sponsored the bill, Senator Stabenow, Hassan, and Brown, for their support. We do have a lot of support from the community on this bill as well. I have letters here with me today representing thousands of organizations in every state. We have one letter that the coalition has signed with 1,500 nonprofits that have signed on, and another with hundreds of local United Ways. Mr. Chairman, I believe these letters and others have already been submitted for the record, but I would ask that a few other letters that have also come in today be included in the record as well. The Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits, Faith and Giving, the Jewish Federations of North America, the National Philanthropic Trust, the National Council on Nonprofits, the Philanthropy Roundtable, and Philanthropy Southwest have all written in addition to that.
Without objection, they'll go into the record now.
So now that I've completely spoiled all of my time for questions, making a statement, I'd love to be able to visit with all of you at great length on this, but the chairman's an ogre on time, and so I'm going to have to be attentive on this. Mr. Cardinale, I do want to talk about how the deduction influences the behavior of non-itemizers. What have you seen on that?
Well, first of all, thank you for your leadership, and I think independent sector stands squarely behind pretty much everything you just said. The one additional item that's important is that by expanding the non-itemizer, we actually incentivize people to participate in their community. It expands a number of donors. And we know once a donor starts, there's a high probability that they will continue to grow. So we'll build out a pipeline, and it links to volunteerism. It gets them out into their communities. So they're donating and they're volunteering, and that builds civic trust. So 100% behind your points.
Thank you. I would only mention one other thing on this. Mr. Cardinale earlier said that by definition, when you're giving like this, it can't be beneficial to you. I would say when people give to nonprofits, it is very beneficial to them in the community and to them personally. The old, it's better to give than receive, definitely kicks in when you're giving on it.